All right, hello everybody. Hopefully you're having a great weekend. So today we're talking about early Japan and the Imperial age of Japan. Now that just kind of a tidbit of information, the name Japan actually comes from a Chinese word, Rai Ben. Let's write it out here, Rai Ben, which means origin of the sun. So we also have, Japan, the land of the rising sun. Some of you may have heard of, but this is where we're talking about. First and foremost, let's talk about some basic geography so we know where we're at. So in relation to China, you can see that Japan is quite close. So we'll see a decent amount of Chinese influence on Japan. Also part of that will be coming through Korea, also very close to Japan. But if we take a closer look, if we take a closer look at Japan, let's get rid of this. Okay, sorry about that. We're looking at a group of islands. Now they're really four major islands, but then there's a bunch more smaller ones around it. It is a pretty mild climate. There's also a decent amount of rainfall that takes place there, but they also have mountains in Japan. There's not a whole lot of farmland, so that is going to be a geographical challenge, but they're going to have enough other things to get by. They also have some other geographical challenges, though, in that they have typhoons, earthquakes, tidal waves, all of these things that will, cause them some issues. Certainly later on, we're going to talk about when the Mongols try to attack. Some of these weather patterns are going to help them out, but that's for another day. So as we take a look at early Japan, one of the things about Japan was that they had hundreds of clans with their own gods and goddesses. So with that, these varied beliefs and practices, they formed Shinto, or Way of the Gods. Now, Shinto, not to be confused with this Shinto, or this Shinto. We are talking about the Way of the Gods. So the real Shinto, it's also spelled differently, but the Shinto we're talking about in terms of Japan, it's a religion based on respect for nature and also a blending of worshiping ancestors. So they certainly have that in common with the Chinese in that they do worship their ancestors. So this could be an issue of cultural diffusion taking place. They also believed in this thing called kami. Let me write that up here. Let's shrink you down here. And we've got... Okay, kami is the belief in divine spirits that dwelled in nature. The divine spirits that dwelled in nature. So kind of how they looked at this was, with all the things in nature that were kind of mysterious. For example, like a piece of rock that sticks out of the ocean. This would be mysterious in terms of how it got there, how it was placed in nature. This would be the kami. So that's just kind of an interesting side note there with Shinto. But this religion is going to remain, and we'll talk about how it's going to develop when other religions blend with it in a little bit. Okay, so next we have the Yamato emperors. So now we're getting into really the imperial age in Japan. So by the 400s, so talking about the 400s, sorry for the lovely handwriting, the Yamato clan established itself as the leading clan in Japan. So you have these clans all over the place. They kind of fight for power, and the Yamatos were the leaders. Their family claimed divinity, so they had this connection with the gods. Again, another aspect similar to the Chinese. But what started to happen with the Yamatos was that their emperors actually lacked power. So these guys, the emperors, are figureheads. Okay, so although they're at the top of society, they really have no power. The real power rested with the clan who ruled in the emperor's name. So you have these clans that are, technically in control by the emperor, but really it's the leaders of the clans that have the power. So this dual structure became an enduring characteristic of the Japanese government. So you're basically going to have a figurehead that's at the top that doesn't really do anything. So we'll talk about another one of these later. And actually, still today, there are places where a king or queen is at the top, but they really don't do anything. And I'm sure some of you are already figured out who that is. So as far as Japanese culture goes, really it was the Korean travelers that brought these Chinese ideas and customs to Japan. And one of those big customs, of course, is going to be Buddhism, as we can see here. Now, some of the Japanese, when Buddhism arrived, they didn't want to completely abandon Shintoism. So what you start to see is the Shinto practices and rituals starting to blend with the Buddhist beliefs. So some more cultural diffusion. Now, the other thing that the Japanese did was they sent missions out to investigate Chinese civilization. So they were very curious about it, so they sent people out that way. And they came back with a lot of ideas that the Japanese are going to adapt, adopt and then adapt to their own system. So one would be the writing. That's going to be the big one. Okay, so they get writing from the Chinese. They get cooking ideas, gardening, tea making, hairdressing. So you've got all these things, all these aspects of Chinese culture coming to Japan. So really, though, they're going to start to adapt them to suit the needs of the Japanese, because they're not just going to implant Chinese culture completely, but it's going to be this cultural blending. Again, come back to cultural diffusion here. So next up, transitioning into the next period, the HighEnd Period. This is a period in which the emperor's court is actually going to move to HighEnd, which is also modern-day Kyoto. Okay, and in this HighEnd period, they're going to reform the court society. So how it is to be involved in the emperor's court. So basically, they came up with these rules that dictated every single aspect of life. Etiquette was extremely important. Noble women wore their hair down to their ankles. They blacked their teeth with cosmetics, and they dyed their clothing to match the seasons. And these were rules that they had to follow. Now, we know a lot about this through some of their writing. Let me pull these up here for you. Okay, so we have the Tale of Genji by Lady Murasaki, and we have Sei Shonagon's The Pillow Book, which both really describe what life is like in the courts. So if you're looking for a primary source from the HighEnd period, this is going to be the big thing that you find, and this is also going to be kind of some literature that we could compare to European literature in the Middle Ages, and specifically referring to chivalry in terms of how people should act. But we'll talk more about that with the European Middle Ages. So this is kind of the HighEnd period that takes place here. Next up is the decline of central power. So how it's going to shift away from Imperial Japan and move more towards feudal Japan. So what's going to happen is you have these large landowners that are moving away from the capital, and with that they're going to set up their own private armies. Okay, and as trade and travel became more unsafe, small farmers and landowners traded land to strong warlords in exchange for protection. So what starts to happen is you have this kind of mutual obligation between the two, and what happens is these lords, they're going to gain more and more power as they moved away from the central government, away from Kyoto or Heian. And this really starts the beginning of the feudal system in Japan. So this is a big shift in what's going to take place. So what we'll do is on Monday, we'll take a look at feudal Japan. This is where your samurai warriors will come into play, and we'll look at some cool things from them and kind of how Japan is going to go through this feudal period. But I'm sure all of you are wondering if I've ever been to Japan. And so let me show you a picture here. Okay, so actually a couple pictures here, little family pics. We have Emma here standing in front of one of these Japanese structures. And we'll zoom in another one. You see Emma and Ava in the same place. But this is not Japan. This is Disney World. So this is the Epcot Center around the world. So I'll leave you with that. Hopefully you have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.